This story began in the Demon Lord's castle, where the mighty ruler of darkness roared in agony as 4 overpowered mages unleashed their devastating power, striking the Demon King down with merciless powerful surge of electricity. Following this remarkable defeat, the Kingdom of Azure threw the biggest party of the century at the triumphant return of these 4 heroes. Even the king was impressed with the heroic feat, and as the 4 heroic mages knelt before the king expressed his deepest gratitude for ridding the kingdom of the Demon Lord. In honor of their bravery, the king bestowed upon them the highest mage title ever awarded, the Exalted 4 Emperors. As the king announced this, Eftel, our protagonist, stood in disbelief. This title was normally reserved for royalty, and yet here he was, about to be crowned Emperor Stormdale. As the king placed the crown of honor on Eftel's head, proclaiming him Emperor Stormdale, Eftel couldn't believe it. Tears of joy streamed down his face as the crowd cheered. This marked the greatest moment of his life, a reward for 40 years of magical dedication. Amid his tears, Eftel recalled those decades spent honing his craft, now gloriously rewarded. 15 years had passed after this great event. Eftel, now an old geezer, lived quietly in the countryside, cultivating monstrous plants. But while tending to his plants, Eftel noticed his palms were bloody, but he wasn't alarmed because he already knew he had a terminal illness that would die at any time. That's when Merlin, a sassy young mage in training, strolled up to Eftel asking why he persisted in his research despite his health condition. In response, Eftel turned and inquired if she worried for his health, to which the young girl answered yes. Eftel was about to say something when he suddenly remembered the past when he and his colleagues had leveled the demon castle. As the castle collapsed, Eftel found a demon child and her mother trapped in a fallen rubble. The demon mother had begged for baby Merlin to be saved, and Eftel, moved by compassion, accepted and saved the child. Back in the present, Eftel, remorseful, realized Merlin likely didn't recall he'd wiped out her entire race, and her concern for his health deepened his guilt even more. Nevertheless, Eftel answered her question, explaining that his relentless research was because he had always wanted to become the world's strongest mage. However, Eftel remarked that one day he suddenly realized that the pinnacle of magic wasn't something anybody could just reach. Merlin protested, asking what the heck he was talking about, and then reminded him he was the strongest mage in the land, the mighty Emperor Stormgale. Calmly, Eftel countered that he was considered mighty in the eyes of the common man, but in the face of true power he was just a mid-tier mage. Moreover, Eftel confessed that compared to his other 3 colleagues blessed with overwhelming skills, he was nothing but trash. Suddenly, a messenger rushed up, handing Eftel a letter and announcing that Lord Blazesoul, one of his former comrades, had cracked the code on magical talent. Eftel nearly dislocated his jaw reading the letter, where he realized that Blazesoul had actually developed a method to measure magical aptitude. Something Eftel had failed at for decades. Of course, Eftel wasted no time ordering his students inside to test it. There, 4 test tubes with special solutions sat on a table, and then Eftel announced that Merlin would be the first subject. Eftel instructed that 4 strands of Merlin's hair be placed in the solution, and soon the students marveled as the tubes lit up like Christmas tree, glowing blue and green. When a student asked what the colors signified, Eftel explained that according to Blazesoul's research, they represented the elements of water and wind, and their brightness reflected Merlin's level of compatibility with the elements. Since basic magic split into 4 elements, fire, earth, water, and wind, and looking at the result of the experiment, Eftel was very certain that Blazesoul's theory was pure genius. Unlike the Academy's decade-long process of teaching all elements to the students before testing their talents, Blazesoul's method could identify talent at birth. Eagerly, Eftel resolved to test himself, but Merlin objected, insisting his greatness was undisputed. Still, his students hyped him up, excited to see the famed mage's results and how the test tubes would explode from too much glow. Eftel himself was curious. He felt that after a lifetime of contributing his life to the study of magic and had failed time and time again to reach the top, he deserved to know if he ever did stood a chance or even got the potential to be the best. As a boy, while his peers played, he'd outworked everyone in the kingdom, even his talented colleagues. Yet, in the present, his eyes widened in absolute horror when, after the test tubes remained colorless. The room went silent. After consulting Blazesoul's notes, his students deduced that colorless meant that the subject was a magical failure. Eftel found it unbelievable that after all these years, he had spent his entire life faking it and never made it, since according to the test result, he had not been blessed with a single spirit of the element. Eftel, in despair, questioned how it was even possible that a talentless nobody was even crowned an emperor. A student suggested retesting for errors, but despite desperate repeated tries, the tubes still showed no trace of color. Months later, Eftel's illness had him bedridden, lying there like a useless sack of potatoes. As he waited for the Grim Reaper, Eftel finally understood why he had never reached the same heights as his comrades. He had worked like a maniac and devoted his entire life to the study of magic, and still his colleagues left him in the dust. At that moment, Eftel could not contain the tears from falling freely as he cursed himself for being a talentless old fool. But suddenly, the bed quaked, the ceiling shuddered, and a glowing magical circle appeared, inscribed with skill and reincarnation. Eftel suddenly found himself standing right in the middle of an ocean. Before he could grasp what the heck was happening, a giant goddess chick emerged from the sky, praising his use of the unbreakable skill she'd gifted him. At that moment, Eftel realized that the reason he never quit, even when reality kept slapping him in the face, was because of unbreakable skill. Just then, the goddess announced she would give Eftel a second chance at reincarnation with a skill of his choosing, and when Eftel hesitated, the goddess even suggested accelerated growth, to which Eftel, stubborn as a goat, firmly refused, asserting he didn't need her blessings. Eftel stated that he had everything he needed, and then pointed out that as long as he put in the effort, he could accomplish anything he wanted. Impressed and amused, the goddess remarked that she found his resilience admirable and then deemed his selection complete. The goddess then declared that it was time for his reincarnation, and then asked if Eftel was ready for rebirth, to which Eftel eagerly agreed. As the goddess vanished, wishing him luck, Eftel jolted awake as a boy. With his past memories flooding back, Eftel raced to a mirror, and when he saw he was now a boy, he confirmed he had truly been reincarnated. Back in the game, Eftel vowed to become the world's strongest mage. To test his elements, he set out 4 glasses of solution and dropped in his hair strands. Yet, when they remained colorless, he remembered he had bragged about not needing the goddess blessing, which meant he would be starting his new life from rock bottom. That wasn't a problem for Eftel, but the only thing that got him worried was if in this new life, he still didn't change a thing and history repeated himself. Sometime later, while lying on the grass, Eftel spotted a weird-looking bird flying up in the sky. Recognizing it as a strange dragon, Eftel chased it, fearing it was heading for people's homes. But then, he paused, remembering he was no longer Eftel, the Emperor, but was now a literal brat with the physique of a bug. Meanwhile, some group of soldiers started chasing after the dragon after realizing the dragon was heading for the capital. Still, old habits died hard as Eftel raised a finger and wished he could use one of his former Tier 10 spells. But suddenly a flicker of light started glowing from his finger. As the light intensified, a colossal magic circle materialized in the sky. While Eftel puzzled over it, a powerful surge of electricity blasted upward, startling the army and accidentally electrocuting the dragon, causing it to crash to the ground. At that instant, Eftel realized that, though he might have reincarnated as a talentless brat, his old sage powers were still intact. 3 years passed in a flash and Eftel turned 7, but he never stopped studying all the magic books he could find. While studying, he realized that although he'd reincarnated into his old world, he'd astonishingly been catapulted 400 years after his death. Just then, some random dude at the door handed Eftel's mom some monthly upkeep funds. Eftel currently lived with a young MILF who he later realized was his mom. Sadly, this young hottie was just as talentless as he was, and because of that they wallowed in abject poverty. Meanwhile, the cash-dropping dude turned out to be his stepbrother Frasier, second son of the family. You see, Eftel had been reborn as a member of a family of dukes that happened to be of his descent. Whenever Eftel asked Frasier about their dad, Frasier typically replied that the man was too busy to bother acknowledging his existence. It turned out, Eftel's father was a leading figure in the Order of Mages, and also a duke of the land. Eftel had never met this deadbeat father of his before, but he was told the man was loaded enough to make 9 concubines warm his meat at night alongside Eftel's hot mom. Yet, due to Eftel's mom's lack of talent, she was treated worse than a stray dog by the other hags, and Eftel was treated as an illegitimate child. Even worse, they'd been exiled to a countryside hovel far from the kingdom's bustling town. However, Frasier, despite his legitimacy, couldn't tolerate this injustice and stepped in to help. Eftel grasped that the odds were stacked against him, yet he believed studying magic could carve his path to greatness. That day, over tea, Frasier asked Eftel what he aspired to become as an adult. Excitedly, Eftel proclaimed he would love to be a mage and enroll at the Academy of Magic. But his mom shut him up immediately and reminded Frasier that, like her son was hopeless at magic, and she would prefer he enrolled at the military college instead. Frazier immediately endorsed her idea as a wonderful one and boasted he also graduated from the military college. Frazier added that though his father wanted him to become a mage and follow his footstep, he had chosen to rather become a magic swordsman since it was a rarity in the military and a valuable asset. Frazier mentioned that he happened to be free that day and then sought Eftel's mom permission to give Eftel some masterclass in swordsmanship, which the woman gleefully approved. Later, in the forest, the swordsmanship training commenced, but seeing how excited Frazier was at teaching him swordsmanship, Eftel deduced the reason his brother had been tutoring him all this while and looking out for him was simply because Frazier had pity on him for his lack of magic talent. Even though Eftel knew Frazier wanted him to enroll at the military college, Eftel halted the training session and boldly declared that he really wanted to go to the Magic Academy. Shocked at hearing this, Frazier tried telling the little man that everyone had things they were good at, but then decided to give Eftel a chance to prove he was Magic Academy material. Frazier promised Eftel that if he could replicate his magic spell, then he would personally recommend him to the dean of the Magic Academy. This excited Eftel, but deep down, Frazier knew it was just a waste of time, but aimed to teach the little guy some harsh realities of life. Wasting no time, Frazier muttered some gibberish incantation and then conjured a whirlwind the size of a noodle twirled on a fork. As he hurled it at a tree, the whirlwind managed to snap the trunk of the tree, causing it to collapse. Proud of his divine talent, Frazier turned to Eftel, expecting applause. But Eftel just stood there, waiting for the real show to start. Realizing the dude was actually done, Eftel mirrored him, summoning a colossal whirlwind capable of raising an entire village, shocking the living daylight out of Frazier. The tempest tore through the forest, felling trees in its wake. Horrified that a 7-year-old could pull off such a powerful magic without even uttering a single chance, Frazier asked Eftel if he was actually the one who just did that. Confidently, and yet a little bit embarrassed, Eftel apologized for not mimicking Frazier precisely, and then informed Frazier that it was just some basic Tier 4 magic spell, leaving Frazier stunned, who knew Tier 4 magic spell were advanced level spells. Desperately curious, Frazier demanded to know how Eftel did it. Of course, Eftel wasn't about to reveal he was a top mage that reincarnated into a boy, so he lied like a pro that he read it in a book. Eftel bragged that if he was to be at his best, he could even pull off a Tier 10 spell, and on hearing this bombshell, Frazier lost it and fainted. Eftel, staring at Frazier's unconscious body, couldn't fathom his reaction and felt something was definitely wrong. Also, Eftel remembered that back then when he shot down the dragon from the sky earlier, the knights had assumed the gods did it. So with both the reaction of the knights and his brother Frazier, Eftel was certain something must have gone wrong over the last 4 centuries. That afternoon at home, Eftel pondered about the situation and came to a shocking conclusion that magic had fallen off hard. According to the chart provided, Tier 9 to 10 magic spell were considered lost magic and deemed impossible, while Tier X was considered unthinkable. Also, chantless magic were considered impossible, and no wonder Frazier had fainted after seeing Eftel cast a spell without uttering a single word. Just then, Frazier, who laid on the bed in the room, abruptly regained his consciousness and immediately demanded to know how Frazier had cast a chantless spell. Not wanting to cause another medical emergency, Eftel gaslit the dude into thinking he just hit his head too hard. Frazier, gullible as ever, believed the cap instantly. And with that, they went right back to sword training, where Frazier taught Eftel proper sword handling and footwork, but the dumb kissed dirt repeatedly. Yet, thanks to his goddess-given unbreakable skill, Eftel persisted, determined not to falter against Alcott, despite no intent to join military college. Fast forward 3 years, and Eftel, now 10, had leveled up big time. He could slice through rocks and trees with ease. All that training had changed him. He wasn't just chasing magic anymore. He wanted to be the ultimate magic swordsman. One day, while training, Frazier told him they had a special guest instructor. Eftel, intrigued, waited to see who it was. Then, in walked a freakishly huge, battle-scarred monster of a man. Frazier introduced him as Moriah, ex-commander of the kingdom's knights. The dude was built like a skyscraper, and Eftel looked like an ant next to him. This freak of nature smugly demanded they started the duel immediately, but sensing Eftel's hesitation, probably due to fear, Moriah wasted no time, leaped high and attacked with his massive sword. Eftel dodged skyward, and was amazed that the big guy wasn't only huge, but also freakishly fast. As Moriah continued his relentless assault, Eftel, with no choice, channeled mana to his legs, boosting his agility and impressing Moriah. The two titans clashed blades at breakneck speed, forcing Mariah to admit that the kid was really something, and then hint at a recommendation. Watching, Alcott was highly impressed at Eftel's mana control. Recalling one of their trainings, Frasier had initially taught Eftel how to control mana in his body as a way of enhancing his physical abilities, but he was shocked when Eftel did it in one try and smoothly as well. Back to the duel, Eftel knew he could finish the big guy if he wanted to using magic, but mid-leap, dodging an incoming attack, he figured winning with magic would be meaningless, and it would be even more satisfying to win with the sword. As the duel intensified, Mariah swung his giant blade, which Eftel parried. However, the immense pressure from Mariah's sword overwhelmed Eftel. Just when Mariah assumed Eftel was weak, Eftel stunned Mariah by swirling their blades skyward, moved right into Mariah's big arm, gripped it tightly, and surprisingly gave the big guy a WWE power slam. Mariah laid on the ground, eyes opened, and could not believe he nearly saw his ancestors while dueling a rugrat. While Eftel, surprised that his body acted instinctively, looked at his palm and remembered that the move was as a result of learning judo in his past life. Then, Mariah rose, slapped Eftel's back, and announced he had passed the test. Eftel, not recalling signing up for any test, demanded an explanation, to which Alcott revealed Mariah was actually the military college headmaster, and Eftel, by winning the fight, had just secured his admission to the military college. Later that evening, the weather was terrible and Frasier suddenly remembered that Eftel was still out in the forest, probably still training, so he decided to go get him. Our boy, meanwhile, was out there in the forest flexing his tier 10 magic spell and destroying the ecosystem. He loved the storm because it gave him free sound effects for his destruction, and kept nosy people from seeing the magic carnage he was unleashing. Just then, Frasier rushed into the forest, interrupting Eftel's training session. Concerned, Frasier sternly warned Eftel to stay safe and avoid risking his life at such a crucial moment of his life, especially with his upcoming enrollment at the military college just around the corner. Although Eftel hated the idea of enrolling in the military college, but thanks to his WWE takedown of Mariah, his fate was sealed. In this world, a child officially transitioned to adulthood at 15, consequently requiring them to leave home. At that time, Eftel, still 14, had rejected the military college and, despite his lack of magical talent making the Magic Academy a long shot, he vowed that upon turning 15, he would leave home, prove his worth, and secure a place at the Magic Academy no matter what. Upon returning home that day, Frasier announced to Eftel and his mom that he had a great news. Eftel's father had finally agreed to meet him. While Eftel's mom was so excited about the news to the point of shedding tears, Eftel felt no spark of excitement, given that the old man had made no effort to see him in all 14 years of his life. The next day, Frasier escorted Eftel and his mom to the Alcott's palace, their father's grand residence. Upon stepping inside the mansion, Eftel could not believe that while he and his mom were out there eating the struggle, his deadbeat father was living like an emperor. As Frasier announced their arrival, Eftel spotted his dad chilling like a king, with some random ugly dude beside him with a forehead like Megamind's. Without hesitation, Eftel addressed the Duke as father and introduced himself as his son, only for Alcott to sharply correct him, insisting he use your grace instead. Duke Alcott clarified that the reason be, Eftel was an illegitimate son and a total disgrace to his bloodline. The Duke went on a whole rant about how a son of the famed Emperor Stormgale as a talentless waste of oxygen brought him to tears. Yet Eftel, secretly the reincarnated Stormgale, silently wept within, just thinking at how rotten his descendants had become. Moments later, Alcott inquired whether Eftel had secured admission to the military college, to which Eftel confidently replied yes. Alcott chuckled, calling it splendid news, leaving Eftel to ponder if the vile man genuinely took pride in him. However, Alcott soon revealed his true intent, stating that Eftel's enrollment meant he'd no longer need to squander money on him. Gleefully, Alcott proclaimed he'd be free of funding a worthless donkey. Alcott added that his sole request was that Eftel avoid shaming the family, and to ensure this, he summoned his eldest son, Joachim, to confirm Eftel's readiness for the college, a task Scarface Joachim accepted with all pleasure. In the following scene, Eftel was led to the arena to face Joachim in a duel. Before the duel, Frasier gave Eftel a little PSA, warning that Joachim wasn't just some regular swordsman. He was a blade master at 15 and lacked the kindness gene. As Eftel readied himself, Joachim unleashed a torrent of taunts, branding Eftel and his mother stupid peasants. Joachim wasted no time reminding Eftel that everyone in the family despised both him and his whorish mom. Joachim went as far as saying Eftel's mom was a call girl who begged to have a child for their dad because the man was a powerful mage, only to birth a useless, talentless porcupine. With a devilish grin, Joachim mused that he'd love to end Eftel's mother for dragging the family name to the mud, but would settle for crushing Eftel instead. Swinging his sword at Eftel, Joachim signaled the duel's start and, oozing arrogance, boasted he'd grant Eftel the first move. To further mock Eftel, Joachim stuck out his tongue and promised to go gentle on him, though not as gently as their father had mounted his piggy mom. Infuriated beyond measure, Eftel charged at the smug fool without delay. Eftel swung his sword with ferocity, but Joachim, startled by Eftel's speed, narrowly evaded the strike. Swiftly, Eftel infused his steps with mana, and, radiating a fiery aura, clashed blades with a now petrified Joachim. With unrelenting force, Eftel battered Joachim's face, knocking out most of his teeth and sending him crashing to the ground, leaving the onlookers stunned. Standing over Joachim's sprawled form, Eftel warned him never to slander his mother with that filthy mouth again, or mercy would be far from him next time. Joachim, despite his mouth looking like it had just survived a blender attack, still demanded a rematch. But Eftel shot him a chilling glare as he exited the arena, vowing that another fight would be his end. Joachim immediately soiled his pants in fear at hearing those words. With the duel over, Eftel urged his mother to leave at once, but seeing her stunned by his demolition of Joachim, he reassured her with a smile that he remained her son. Afterward, Eftel thanked his wretched father for the invitation and then declared his departure. Several days later, in the kingdom's capital, the city gates swung open, unveiling ranks of knights. As war horns blared, the knightly troop marched forth, primed for battle. Meanwhile, at the outcast's palace, 3 cloaked dudes informed someone at the door that the king had summoned a crusade against their neighbors. That someone was Outcast, who asked if the barbarians were prepared, to which the figures confirmed yes, adding that the vanguard was already in place. On the battlefield, the kingdom's knights stood ready to wage war against the barbaric foes, while back at the palace, Outcast prepared himself to launch his coup d'etat. Meanwhile, Eftel, at home with his mother, heard a loud bang at the door. Upon reaching the door, they stood stunned as a bloodied Frasier appeared, cradling a baby, with a wounded Mariah at his side. Mariah apologized for their sudden intrusion, but Eftel was more concerned about the infant in Frasier's arms. However, 12 hours earlier, at the kingdom's castle, Frasier had assembled the finest knights in the kingdom, and ordered them to ensure they secure the castle with the lives. When Mariah curiously demanded to know why Frasier had gathered such immense number of knights, Frasier revealed that he got an intelligence that the Chancellor's faction planned to assassinate the Crown Prince. You see, the kingdom's leadership split into 2 camps, those loyal to the reigning king and those backing the Chancellor, the king's elder brother. The reason stemmed from the late king bequeathing the throne to his younger son and made the elder the Chancellor. However, since the younger king bore only daughters and no sons for years, the Chancellor's eldest son stood as heir. Then, miraculously, the king sired a son, who was instantly declared the new heir. This angered those who supported the Chancellor, and they began plotting in secret. Hence, the rumors of a plan to assassinate the Crown Prince came to be. Just then, they were alerted that the barbarians had made their way into the castle. Instantly, Frasier ordered that the young prince be safeguarded at all costs. As the barbarians stormed in, Mariah sprang forward, blocking their advance. While the barbarians tore through the castle, Frasier seized the baby prince, and together with Mariah, they escaped. Back in the present, Frasier explained to Eftel and his mother that, with nowhere safe to take the prince, their home was his only refuge. Gazing at the innocent child, Eftel couldn't fathom that a human would go to such an extent as to assassinate a defenseless baby. When Eftel questioned how the barbarians infiltrated despite Frasier's orders to secure the castle, Frasier admitted their father was the head of the Chancellor's faction and might be complicit in the coup. Mariah interjected, asking their next move, to which Frasier replied they couldn't return to the capital, now overtaken by hostile forces. Furthermore, Frasier proposed heading to the frontier to deliver the prince to the royal army. But when Mariah pointed out that it was the dark and cold outside, Frasier suggested departing at dawn instead. The next morning, Frasier and Mariah set out for the frontier without delay, but before they advanced far, Eftel halted them, declaring he'd join their quest. Eftel recalled how, in his past life, the king had shown kindness to him and his comrades after they vanquished the Demon King, which ignited a sense of responsibility to protect the kingdom and its prince. Moreover, Eftel vowed that it was also his responsibility to punish his dishonorable descendants. With that, Eftel bid his tearful mother farewell, and their journey began. After trekking a distance, they heard rustling in the bushes which put them on edge. Suddenly, 5 menacing barbarians emerged, vowing to send Eftel and his team to their makers unless they surrendered the prince. At that instant, Mariah, being the big guy, stepped up, intending to fight, and asked someone to take the baby. However, in the blink of an eye, he watched, awestruck, as Eftel obliterated the barbarians, sending them flying, left, right and center. In a matter of seconds, the barbarians lay defeated, though one barbarian, dazed, scrambled to flee. Eftel moved to pursue, but Frasier stopped him, urging him not to waste effort on the mofo. To evade detection, the group veered into a dense forest path, and after walking further, Eftel's instincts flared, sensing something amiss. Confirming his unease, Frasier noted the absence of squirrels or birds since they'd entered the forest. Suddenly, the sound of a massive explosion nearby alerted them, and without hesitation, Frasier insisted they exit the forest immediately. Frasier directed them toward the trees, claiming it would lead out, and as they raced ahead, they froze on seeing millions of mages bearing the ducal mage core emblem encircled the woods. Even worse, Eftel alerted the team that flames were blocking their retreat. With that, Mariah deduced the Duke aimed to smoke them out, since a wall of flame blocked their retreat and an army of mages blocked their way ahead. Realizing they were stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, Mariah chose to confront the mages. He handed the prince to Eftel, announcing he'd face the army alone to give Eftel and Frasier the time to escape, prompting Frasier to call his idea the dumbest plan he'd ever heard. After a moment's thought, Frasier suggested negotiating with his father, reasoning that, even though his father was power-hungry, the old man wouldn't harm his own son. With that, Frasier stepped into the open field, arms raised to show he was unarmed, and sought an audience with his father. When the mages asked Alcott if they should aim for his head since it was a clean shot, Alcott declined, opting to meet his beloved son personally. As Alcott approached, Frasier grew hopeful the old man might listen. Shockingly, Alcott, with the coldest stare known to man, declared Frasier an eternal obstacle to his ambitions, and before Frasier could react, Alcott drew his wand, unleashed a lightning strike, and electrocuted him. From the forest's edge, Eftel and Mariah watched in horror, and before they could process what just happened, Alcott commanded his mages to fire at will. In unison, the mages chanted a Tier 6 spell, intent on blasting the area with electricity. Eftel dashed into the field to save Frasier, but he was too late. The mages unleashed a surge of lightning, its powerful force pushing Eftel back into the woods. Moments later, Mariah tried comforting Eftel over Frasier's death, but memories of their bromance flooded Eftel's mind. Fueled by rage, Eftel snapped into a berserk state, scaring the life out of Mariah, who warned that charging the battlefield was a death wish. Undeterred, Eftel moved toward the battlefield, summoned a Tier 9 ice spell, and froze the trees solid, leaving Mariah dumbfounded. Simultaneously, the mages could not believe their eyes at seeing the trees frozen like popsicles. As Eftel strode from the forest like a titan, Alcott, shocked, ordered his army of mages to show Eftel their true might by blowing him to smithereens. Swiftly, the mages cast a Tier 5 spell, raining explosive arrows on Eftel, that triggered a massive blast. Alcott excitedly cheered, certain Eftel couldn't survive. But when the smoke cleared, Eftel stood unscathed, stunning the mages. They whispered in disbelief, questioning how Eftel could have endured a Tier 2 arrow barrage and a Tier 5 explosion, unaware Eftel had summoned an active barrier. Infuriated by Eftel's resilience, Alcott shouted for his mages to unleash their trump cards, bombarding Eftel with Tier 6 magic. As the mages unleashed concentrated fire on the battlefield, Eftel activated an ultimate defense formation, shielding himself completely. Then, at blinding speed, Eftel plunged into the mages' ranks, cutting them down with his sword. Panicked, the mages fled, but Eftel relentlessly slashed through them like a master swordsman. As the survivors' mages turned to escape, Eftel raised his hand skyward, and instantly, clouds gathered. The mages froze in terror, realizing Eftel commanded the weather. But it wasn't mere control. Suddenly, a colossal surge of lightning crashed from the sky, reducing the mages to ashes. With all the mages vanquished, and as the dust settled, Alcott and Joachim found themselves shielded within a bubble that astonished them. While they gleefully celebrated their survival, Eftel emerged from the smoke, striding toward them. Upon spotting Eftel, Joachim lunged forward, seizing his shirt and threatening to beat him to a pulp for defeating their mages. But Eftel delivered a thunderous punch, knocking out Joachim's remaining teeth and sending him sprawling to the ground. Eftel announced he would arrest his father and Joachim for attempting to murder the crown prince. However, Alcott countered with a threat to use his authority as a duke to punish Eftel for treason against the kingdom's military. Infuriated by this, Eftel played Alcott's face like a soccer ball and boldly declared he'd show no mercy to a dirty swine who'd take the life of his own son in cold blood. Eventually, Eftel turned over his father and wicked stepbrother, ending the coup. Consequently, Alcott and Joachim faced conviction and a public execution for their crimes against the king and prince. Meanwhile, back home, Eftel rejoiced beyond words upon learning Frasier had survived the electrocution back in the battlefield. Frasier explained that a family heirloom had preserved his life. Recognizing it as an artifact from his past life, Eftel felt glad Frasier inherited it. Due to Alcott's treason, the king initially stripped the family of its nobility, but because of Frasier's bravery in protecting the prince, the king reconsidered and permitted them to retain their land and status. As a result, Frasier relocated Eftel and his mom to the Alcott Palace where they started living. Months later in the mountains, Eftel revealed the true strength of his power by unleashing Tier 7 Demonic Heat Wave and Tier 7 Chaos Wind, leaving Frasier and Mariah awestruck by his power. When Eftel apologized for keeping his powers a secret from them, Frasier asked him not to, mentioning he must have had valid reasons to. Furthermore, Frasier advised that Eftel's extraordinary magic should remain hidden from most, as it might be deemed unnatural. In agreement, Mariah warned that revealing Eftel's full strength could disrupt the balance of magical power. After witnessing his incredible display, Frasier and Mariah demanded to know if Eftel still planned on attending the military college, to which Eftel replied no, firmly insisting he would attend the Academy of Magic instead. Mariah called the choice foolish, questioning why Eftel would join the Academy when his power already surpassed everyone in the Academy. In response, Eftel claimed that in order to improve his skills, the Academy was the perfect place to do that because they had the best facilities. Secretly, though, Eftel knew there was nothing for him to learn at the Academy, and the only reason he would want to go there was to study the research that had been done on magical aptitudes for the last 400 years. So Eftel told the guys that his mind was made up on going to the Magic Academy, which though not in support they reluctantly accepted. However, they promised to keep training his swordmanship till he is old enough. Years flew by swiftly, and Eftel, now old enough, left a letter for his mother, announcing his departure for the Magic Academy's enrollment and thanking her for raising him. However, before he could leave, the mom found out, and alongside Frasier and Mariah, they came to see him off. The mother got all emotional at seeing her son all grown and finally leaving to find his own path, and couldn't help but lunge at Eftel with a warm embrace. As tears welled in their eyes, Eftel and his mother clung to each other, and he apologized for trying to leave without a goodbye. However, the mom, finally regaining her composure, pointed out that he was now a full-grown man with a matured pickle and was free to make decisions. Nevertheless, she assured him that anytime he felt homesick, he would always have a home to return to. Eftel thanked her once more, embraced her, and then began his journey to make his own path. His goal was to attain the pinnacle of magic, and this time not let his lack of talent hinder him. After days of travel, Eftel finally made it to the big city, and was thrilled to see civilization. He decided to take a break, and as he spotted a tea shop, he headed inside for some tea break. While enjoying his sweet tea, Eftel overheard background voices of someone shouting. It turned out to be a disgusting old man praising a younger dude who, according to the old baldy, was a first-class mage. However, the arrogant young man, Edworth, snapped at the old fool to stop disrupting his peace. Edworth didn't stop there, but made sure to insult the life out of the old man by bragging that at a young age he had reached the level of a Class A adventurer, unlike the geezer, who retired at 50 as a pitiful C rank. Shamelessly, the old man offered to treat Edworth to a feast, but Edworth mocked him as an idiot, bragging that his night was reserved for steamy fun with the demon girl he gripped tightly. Edworth went as far as showing the old geezer his slave crest engraved to the girl's back cheeks, embarrassing the girl, and then pointed out that because he had completed the slave process, the time was right to destroy her tunnel with his pipe. But while watching, Eftel found Edworth's arrogant attitude repulsive and dissuading. Looking at the slave demon girl, Eftel couldn't help but remember Merlin, his demon mage in training in his past life. Suddenly, a scared man rushed in, announcing that a ferocious orc giant was attacking the neighboring community. Meanwhile, just outside the tea spot, the giant orc had just destroyed a carriage and was heading straight for the tea spot. Everyone heard the sound outside and in panic rushed out, only to be met by the horrifying sight of the monstrous orc. But just then, the old man announced, assuring everyone that a rank A adventurer was in their midst, and there was no reason to be scared. with everyone rest assured and hailing praises on Edworth. The arrogant fool stepped up like the main character of the story, promising to make short work of the weak orc, and asked them not to fret for any reason. Even Eftel that hated his guts was fooled by the dude's charisma, and assumed the guy might be capable. Wasting no time, Edworth assumed a charismatic pose, turned smugly to the people promising to give them a show worthy of a true mage, which elated the dumb crowds, and then with his wand lifted to the sky, Edworth uttered some useless chants and then blasted the orc with a tier 4 spell Holy Fire, which caused a massive explosion. Contented with what he had done, Edworth turned smugly towards the people who erupted singing his praises. But suddenly, the praises stopped abruptly, and the people stared in utter shock. Edworth, surprised, wondering what was going on, was attacked from the back by the mighty orc. Edworth managed to survive, and as turned his eyes widened in shock, and when he realized the orc wasn't just a normal orc, but the ultimate orc berserker, and his tier 4 spell was useless against such a monster. Scared for his life, Edworth ran for his life like a sissy and immediately summoned a tier 3 holy wall to protect himself. The people frightened approached the wall begging aught be saved, but Edworth just laughed while informing them that they were nothing but diversions for his escape plan. While the people cried and continued to bang on the impenetrable wall to be saved, the orc moved towards them intent on devouring them like midday snacks. But at that moment, Eftel unleashed a tier 6 spell that completely shattered the wall that Edworth had set up and then informed the people to run. Everyone's eyes widened in disbelief that a boy could cast a powerful spell without uttering a single chant. Realizing he had caught the attention of everyone, which he didn't intend to do, Eftel thought deeply about how he would handle the orc, and then decided to use a low-level spell to finish off the monster so as not to attract too much attention. So while lost in thought, the orc attacked, but Eftel leaped to the sky and blasted the monster with a mere tier 3 spell flame. However, to Eftel's shock, the low-level fire engulfed the orc, causing deadly damage, leaving everyone in shock. The beast collapsed to the ground and was instantly obliterated. The old man, watching alongside Edworth, couldn't help but explain that Eftel was a proficient mage, and because of his proficiency, even his low-level 3 spells was as powerful as a tier 5 spell. Just then, the awestruck crowd rushed to meet their savior, and seeing this, Eftel knew he had messed up and was totally flustered in embarrassment. Following that, Eftel approached Edworth and then firmly warned him to have respect for the elderlies. In addition, Eftel mentioned that his escape gimmicks was an attempt at mass murder that could have resulted in a bloodbath, and because of that he had committed a grave crime liable to be severely punished. Furthermore, Eftel clearly stated he would have to turn himself in, and because a petty criminal like him had no right to own a slave, he would have to give the demon girl the dredon she deserves. Edworth in tears agreed he would, and with that Eftel bid them farewell, leaving the demon girl standing there surprised. As Eftel continued his journey to the academy, he noticed the demon slave girl stealthily shadowing him after her arrogant master surrendered to arrest. Growing tired of the theatrics, Eftel turned and called her out, demanding she stop behaving like some creep. Realizing she'd been caught, the frightened slave girl emerged from hiding, announcing she had a request for Eftel. Intrigued, Eftel insisted she reveal it, prompting the flustered and embarrassed demon girl to beg him to become her master. Seeing Eftel's shock, the demon girl threw herself to the dirt, explaining that slaves without masters don't gain freedom automatically, and if caught, she'd be deemed a runaway and subjected to despicable things. Desperately, the slave girl cried that she never want to return to the slave traders. After pondering her words, Eftel realized the girl was stating the truth. He understood that the slave crest stamped on her dumper couldn't be easily erased, and even with her master gone, she remained unfree, vulnerable to some sick scumbags that would torment her to death. Promptly, Eftel asked how she became a slave, to which she introduced herself as Anastasia and recounted her tragic tale. Her family lost a war to humans, enslaving them all, and she'd been a slave since birth. Furthermore, she disclosed that, though hard to believe, her family once held royal status, with a distant relative even running a renowned magic school. Anastasia added that this relative, Lady Merlin, headed the Athena Academy of Magic. At this, Eftel, stunned, asked her whether this Merlin was once a disciple of the 4 emperors, and Anastasia confirmed Merlin studied under the legendary sage and Emperor Stormgale, and after his death she rose to become the world's mightiest sorcerer. Hearing this, Eftel could not believe that his little Merlin had spent the last 400 years making a name for herself and had eventually become the best, which made him swell in pride. Overjoyed Merlin still lived, Eftel recalled Merlin's half-vampire nature, which explained her longevity. In light of this revelation, Eftel agreed to become Anastasia's new master, vowing he couldn't abandon Merlin's kin, thrilling her immensely. With that, Eftel and his new chick set off for the city's entrance exam. While strolling through the bustling city, Anastasia suddenly clutched her grumbling stomach in embarrassment, prompting Eftel to suggest they stop for a meal. They ended up at the kind of restaurant where the chairs cost more than your entire life savings. Anastasia started fidgeting and was totally uncomfortable with its extravagance. But Eftel reassured her not to fret, promising to pamper her like a sugar daddy. As they navigated the plush interior toward a table, guests whispered complaints about Eftel bringing a filthy slave into such an elite venue. But Eftel brushed off their petty gossips and proceeded to his seat like he owned the place. Upon reaching the table, Eftel took off his coat and sat, only to notice Anastasia sitting on the floor, startling him into asking why. When she explained that slaves always sat on the ground, Eftel immediately urged her to take the chair opposite him. Stunned, Anastasia questioned if he truly wanted a lowly slave like her at his table, to which Eftel warmly affirmed yes. Sensing her hesitation, Eftel then ordered her as her master to sit and dine with him as an equal. Reluctantly, Anastasia complied, but just as she sat, the manager frowned. Swiftly, the manager approached Eftel's table, reminding him that slaves weren't permitted to sit in their establishment. The man boasted that their restaurant was one of the city's most exclusive dining spots, and then with a condescending look questioned if Eftel, looking like a street urchin, could even afford the meal. Eftel casually tossed 3 dragon drops onto the table, and the manager's soul left his body. Just for fun, Eftel flashed even more from his coat and asked if the man needed extra motivation to shut up. The manager went from pompous to peasant in 0.2 seconds, groveling for forgiveness. Eftel waved him off and ordered the finest steak money could buy, and adding the foolish manager could keep the change. Moments later, the entire kitchen staff arrived, piling the table with an array of meats. Eagerly, Eftel grabbed a fork and invited Anastasia to dig in. Still, Anastasia hesitated shyly, unable to believe a slave like her deserved such princess treatment. Gently, Eftel encouraged her not to be timid and suggested she view the food as a welcome gift. Eftel also assured Anastasia she could refuse anything she disliked and speak her mind freely. Finally, the entrance exam day arrived. Upon entering the academy, Eftel was amazed at how huge the school was. Without delay, he proposed they head to the registration office, but first, Anastasia, all excited, thanked him for the new clothes and boots he'd bought her. Inside the registration office, Eftel suggested that Anastasia take the exam and enroll, too. Noticing her astonishment, Eftel explained it was open to all, and then decisively tell the officer to register 2 applicants. Skeptical, Anastasia doubted her if she was worthy of the academy, but Eftel reassured her that as Merlin's relative, she carried magical potential. Just then, an announcement directed all applicants to the Colosseum for the exam. So, Eftel and Anastasia joined the others heading there. Upon arrival, they entered the Colosseum to find a sea of ugly contestants, looking more like a criminal lineup than future students. Suddenly, a chihuahua-faced man named Bauer took the podium, declaring himself the exam instructor. Bauer outlined that 50 applicants would battle in the arena, and if anyone fell out of bounds they were automatically disqualified. Additionally, Bauer revealed the fight would continue until only 5 remained, earning them a shot at the written exams. He further noted that weapons, spells, tricks, anything at their disposal were fair game. To begin, he called the first group to the platform, but just then Anastasia whispered loudly to Eftel that the test was reckless and absurd. Overhearing her, Bauer snapped and then irritably stated that if not that his job was to find the uncut diamonds among loads of maggots, he wouldn't even waste his time dealing with worthless bottom-feeding brats like her. He doubled down, stating that the real talents had already been admitted on the strength of recommendation, and they were all bunch of talentless maggots. Bauer added they should be grateful for the chance, and then vowed to give Eftel and Anastasia the attention they craved. Immediately, Bauer summoned Eftel and Anastasia to the platform, designating them among the first 50. Addressing the other applicants, Bauer announced the start of the duel, and then invited volunteers to join. Instantly, most of the disgusting faces applicants swarmed the platform, and started advancing menacingly toward Eftel and Anastasia. Terrified, Anastasia gripped Eftel's arm, whispering she lacked any combat skills, to which Eftel calmly advised her to stay behind him. The narration was interrupted for a little backstory of Bauer. Bauer, the exam instructor, was just a B-rank adventurer who deeply loved his job. His role as an exam instructor enabled him to earn as much as he did hunting monsters, without all the messy bloodshed. However, his only frustration was that, despite years in the position, he had never encountered a truly powerful and promising applicant. Consequently, while gazing at Eftel and Anastasia, whom he regarded as the underdogs for the battle royale, he observed that they had been surrounded by the other applicants. Suddenly, while lost in thought, Bauer was jolted back to reality as one applicant crashed onto the podium where he stood with a bloody nose. Shocked, Bauer wondered what in the world was happening, and as he surveyed the arena, he saw bodies flying left and right like they'd been caught in a hurricane. Upon discovering that Eftel was the source of the chaos, Bauer's shock deepened. Yet he soon calmed himself, recalling that no matter how overpowering someone might be, they typically get overwhelmed by the group in a battle royale. Nevertheless, contrary to his expectations, Eftel continued demolishing every applicant in the arena, sending them flying out like confetti, which left Bauer utterly stunned to his core. At that moment, Bauer also noticed that Eftel had been fighting and defeating all the applicants without straying from Anastasia's side, a feat he found remarkably impressive, prompting him to liken Eftel to a monstrous swordsman. Abruptly, while still spectating, he realized the applicants had grown wise and shifted their focus to Anastasia, evidently seeing her as Eftel's Achilles' heel. However, to everyone's astonishment, Anastasia chanted a level 3 magical spell known as Wind Depression, which turned the applicants into airborne trash bags. Naturally, Eftel was impressed by Anastasia's magic, but then he loudly questioned whether she truly needed to chant to cast a spell. Hearing this, the other applicants burst into laughter, as did Bauer, assuming Eftel was just another overpowered but clueless meathead who knew nothing about magic. When Anastasia replied that a person unable to chant couldn't cast magic, Eftel countered that this wasn't true. To prove his point, Eftel extended his hand and, without uttering a word, unleashed a level 4 spell called Parallel Activation, hurling everyone in the Colosseum into the air like kites, leaving Bauer horrified for life. With all 48 applicants flung from the arena, Eftel and Anastasia raised their cards, signaling they had won the battle and compelling Bauer to acknowledge their triumph. Elated by the outcome, Eftel told Anastasia that the first barrier had been overcome, and the next challenge, the written test, was scheduled for the following day. In his past life, Eftel had been a bookworm, and since he lacked natural talents to keep pace with the other emperors, he had devoted himself to studying all sorts of magic books. Later, while strolling back home, Eftel asked Anastasia how she felt about the upcoming written exam, to which she admitted feeling nervous, as her life as a slave had never required her to face such a test. Moved by her words, Eftel resolved to assist her with studying once they returned to the inn. The following day at the Magic Academy, Anastasia thanked Eftel for helping her study through the night, and he reassured her it was no trouble. Soon after, the examiner began distributing the exam papers, and Eftel was taken aback when the examiner casually dumped an entire dictionary's worth of questions on his desk. Then, the examiner announced the start of the test, prompting the duo to dive into the questions without delay. A few minutes later, as the exam concluded, Anastasia asked Eftel how it went, and he confidently revealed that he had answered every question. Stunned, Anastasia pointed out his mistake, explaining that it was a free selection exam where he wasn't supposed to answer everything. Hearing this, Eftel couldn't believe he had completed all the questions when he only needed to tackle 30% of them. The following week, someone in the academy shouted in amazement, 958 points. It turned out the school management was incredulous that an applicant had answered every question. Subsequently, the headmaster, Lucent, a man with no eyes but suspiciously large eyebrows, demanded to know the applicant's name, and a bespectacled teacher revealed it was a student named Eftel, who curiously shared the name of the Emperor of Thunder. Still skeptical, Lucent concluded that the brat must have cheated, but then Bauer strode into the office and informed the officials that during the physical examination, Eftel had activated a level 4 parallel activation, leaving them all in total shock. With this revelation, Lucent speculated that Eftel might be the second coming of the Emperor of Thunder. On the day of the eligibility results, all the students gathered at the school, eager to see if they had been accepted into the academy. Eftel and Anastasia were present too, and moments later, Anastasia hugged Eftel, exclaiming that she had been accepted into the special class. Though overjoyed for her, Eftel had a problem. He couldn't find his number. Frantically, he searched everywhere, but failing to locate it, he grew frustrated, wondering if his overachieving mistake of answering all the questions had cost him admission. Just then, Anastasia drew his attention to a notice on the wall, and when Eftel checked, he discovered he had topped the exams and been elected as the representative of the special students. Beaming, Anastasia congratulated him for his brilliant mind, which made Eftel blush in embarrassment as he pondered what being the representative entailed. While heading to enroll, Anastasia handed Eftel a letter explaining that as the representative, he would be the poster boy for the special students. Upon entering the hall for enrollment, Eftel froze when he spotted a hot chick who bore a striking resemblance to Merlin. After staring intently, Eftel became certain it was indeed Merlin and wondered why she was on the school premises. Swiftly, Eftel made the executive decision to hide, knowing that if Merlin, who knew him well from his past life, spotted him, she might sense something amiss. Thus, he suggested to Anastasia that they leave the area and head deeper into the academy. Meanwhile, as Merlin walked, she felt an oddly familiar presence, but when she turned to look, no one was there. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had sensed Eftel, which seemed impossible since he was dead. Suddenly, she caught sight of Eftel departing with Anastasia, prompting her to chase after him and call him to a halt. Merlin asked Eftel if he was related to Emperor Stormgale in any way. Aware he couldn't disclose his true identity, Eftel denied knowing what she meant and swiftly dragged Anastasia away, claiming they were late for lunch, which only heightened Merlin's suspicion. Later that afternoon, while eating lunch, Eftel confided to Anastasia that the woman he'd spoken to was her distant relative, Merlin. However, Anastasia admitted it was her first encounter with Merlin. Anastasia then explained that, according to her parents, the Demon Lord was her ancestor, and since Merlin was the Demon Lord's daughter, she was essentially Anastasia's great-great-aunt, which clarified why Anastasia didn't recognize her. Subsequently, Eftel couldn't help but wonder what Merlin was doing at the academy. According to Anastasia, Merlin served as the headmaster of Alfina Academy, which made Eftel wonder if the real purpose Merlin had come to the academy was to teach. Later that day, clad in their school uniforms, Eftel and Anastasia attended the freshman welcome event, where Lucent congratulated and welcomed the students. Lucent addressed the scholarship class, the noble class, the commoner class, and the honorary position under which Eftel was categorized. Following the welcome speech, the headmaster introduced Merlin as a special guest, thrilling the students but sending Eftel into a panic. Nevertheless, Eftel felt relieved upon realizing Merlin was only a guest, not a teacher. Suddenly, his soul nearly left his body when he was called to deliver a speech as the honorary student. Upon hearing Eftel's name announced, Merlin grew even more suspicious. As Eftel approached the podium, he couldn't ignore Merlin's piercing stare. After the event, while in class, a group of hot chicks were all over Eftel, begging to cream on his sausage or just get an STD from him. But just then, Merlin stormed into the classroom with a bad and bougie presence and slammed Eftel's exam paper onto his desk. Before the thirsty baddies could say a word, Merlin shot them a back off my man glare and ordered them to leave, instantly scaring the thirstiness out of them. Once the room cleared, Merlin asked Eftel if that was indeed his name, and when he confirmed it, she pressed him on whether he knew what reincarnation meant, to which Eftel, startled, falsely claimed he'd never heard the term before. Next, Merlin presented his written exam answers, noting they mirrored exactly what the legendary Stormgale would have written if alive. Moreover, she pointed out that not only did Eftel get every answer correct, but his responses were so archaic, dating back 400 years, that they baffled the teachers. Merlin immediately demanded an explanation for the coincidence, and in that moment, Eftel realized he'd messed up by not updating his knowledge before the exam. Yet, before he could respond, Merlin softened, admitting he reminded her of someone dear to her heart. Acknowledging she might have come on too strong, Merlin apologized and mused that, while reincarnation seemed far-fetched, Eftel bore a striking resemblance to her master. At that instant, Eftel considered revealing his reincarnation, but knowing it would complicate his pursuit of magic, he instead beckoned Merlin to come closer. As she leaned in, Eftel whispered that Emperor Stormgale had a mistress, and he was a descendant of their secret love child. He added that Stormgale had ensured he inherited all sorcery knowledge without ever revealing his existence. Infuriated by this, Merlin grabbed Eftel by the hair, put him in a chokehold, and warned him never to share that secret, as it would tarnish Stormgale's honor as one of the 4 emperors. Satisfied with his deception, Merlin rose, head bowed, and expressed sorrow that her master had hidden having a child with some random hag. Nonetheless, Merlin declared that she felt a strong urge now to test who was a stronger disciple between the two of them. Merlin then mentioned hearing that, as the honors student, Eftel was slated for a mock battle with a teacher later that day. It turned out the faculty had insisted Eftel participate to prove that no matter how strong a student was, they couldn't rival a true mage. With that, Merlin demanded to be that teacher and challenged Eftel to a showdown on the combat practice field. Leaving him stunned, Though Eftel knew this risked exposing his identity and derailing his plans, he couldn't resist wanting to see how Merlin had grown over 400 years, so he accepted. Several hours later, at the Academy's combat field, Eftel and Merlin prepared for their duel. The students buzzed with excitement to witness the renowned Merlin showcase her magic in person. As the duel commenced, Eftel suggested starting with warm-ups, to which Merlin agreed. Without delay, Eftel launched a Tier 6 flame formation at Merlin, who was astonished he considered such a powerful move a mere warm-up. However, Merlin countered with a Tier 7 impregnable wall, shielding herself from the blast and visibly impressing Eftel. She proclaimed that, even if Eftel was the 13th generation Stormgale descendant, she still upheld her pride as his first student. Following this, Merlin retaliated with a Tier 6 flame formation, but just as Merlin did, Eftel erected a Tier 7 impregnable wall to block it. Immediately afterward, Merlin unleashed another fire explosion spell, startling Eftel and alarming the onlookers. Swiftly, Eftel summoned a Tier 7 freezing spell to neutralize her fire, then followed it with a Tier 7 glacial arrow attack to demonstrate his own rapid casting. Back in the past, this rapid chantless casting spell was devised by Stormgale so as to keep up with his fellow sages. Merlin was shocked to see that Eftel could cast a spell without delay, but she immediately summoned an impregnable wall to block the glacier arrow. Undeterred, Eftel rapid cast more glacial arrows, but Merlin blocked each one with multiple impregnable walls. To push her further, Eftel unleashed a massive glacial arrow at Merlin. Shocked by its scale, Merlin quickly summoned an equally mighty impregnable wall to counter it. The intense force shattered her wall, pushing her back, and at that moment, Eftel scolded her for her sloppy spell formation. Hearing this, Merlin felt as though she were being reprimanded by Stormgale himself. Spurred by this to prove her ability to her master, Merlin summoned a formidable Tier 7 impregnable wall, causing Eftel's eyes to widen in sheer amazement. The two continued their fierce exchange, and with each move Eftel made, Merlin saw echoes of her master in him. Briefly pausing the duel, Merlin thanked Eftel for rekindling cherished memories and confessed that, throughout their fight, she saw a spitting image of her beloved master. Then, to conclude the hours-long battle, Merlin announced that if Eftel could withstand her ultimate attack, she would concede. Right after speaking, she summoned a Tier 8 Thunder God's Hammer, surprising Eftel, who hadn't expected such a spell to be her finisher. In an instant, the hammer swelled tenfold in size, leaving Eftel reeling. Immediately following, Merlin rapid cast another spell, then a third with a kick, catching Eftel off guard as he struggled to dodge. Yet, Merlin was just beginning. From her right leg, she cast yet another spell, astonishing Eftel and thrilling him to see her growth over 400 years. He felt gratified that, after his death, Merlin had relentlessly honed her skills. Inspired and competitive, Eftel decided it was time to reveal the full might of Emperor Stormgale. Just as Eftel prepared to strike, Merlin unleashed a massive level 8 lightning spell, triggering a devastating explosion that rocked the entire school building. Panicked, the students in the arena scattered for safety, while Merlin, losing control, nearly succumbed to the lightning's power. However, in that critical moment, Eftel snapped his fingers, absorbing most of the lightning and restoring calm across the arena. Collapsing amid the rubble, Merlin couldn't understand how Eftel had neutralized such a colossal attack with a mere snap of the finger. Laughing in realization, Merlin became convinced Eftel wasn't some illegitimate child, as only one person, Stormgale himself, could perform such a feat. When Eftel approached Merlin with a smile to check if she was okay, Merlin blurted out that he was Stormgale's reincarnation. Realizing the jig was over, Eftel admitted the truth, prompting Merlin to embrace him instantly. As she sat on the ground like a loyal dog, Eftel patted her head and praised her for 400 years of unwavering dedication, leaving Merlin flustered and shedding tears of joy at her master's return. Suddenly, Anastasia burst into the ruined arena, panting heavily, and warned Eftel of bad news. Before she could elaborate, a swarm of students rushed toward Eftel, pleading for him to teach them magic. Overwhelmed by their numbers, Eftel began to flee. While escaping, Merlin demanded to know why he'd even enrolled in the academy, to which Eftel explained he'd thought it would allow him to research magic as a sorcery student. In response, Merlin suggested they abandon the academy immediately. Curious, Eftel asked where they'd go, and Merlin reassured him not to worry, claiming she had a plan. Moments later, Merlin led Eftel and Anastasia to her academy, leaving Eftel stunned as he recognized the mansion he'd once lived in and marveled at how Merlin had preserved it faithfully for 400 years. Merlin then informed Eftel and Anastasia that until she concluded the paperwork for their transfer to her academy, they could pass the time in the mansion freely. Thrilled by this, Eftel realized enrolling in Merlin's academy meant he could continue his pursuit of magic unhindered. Merlin also promised Eftel could freely use the academy's facilities for research, which moved Eftel so deeply that he hugged her milk jugs tightly in gratitude. Consequently, Eftel and Anastasia settled into his original home, and once the transfer paperwork was complete, Merlin adopted them as her children. Upon entering the mansion, Eftel was astonished to find all his grimoires perfectly intact. Thanks to preservation magic, Merlin had meticulously cared for every book in the library, earning an impressed smile from Eftel. Then, he recalled a sword he'd always wanted to wield, buried deep in the treasury. Together with Anastasia, Eftel ventured to retrieve the lightning splitter, only to be halted by a towering, menacing genie who warned them to turn back before they got hurt. Eftel politely skidded the genie to move aside, explaining that he had come to get his sword, lightning splitter. But still, the clapped-faced genie dismissed Eftel as a useless petty thief and asked him never to call the sword his, claiming the sword belonged to the legendary Stormgale, who'd claimed it from the Demon King's castle after defeating him. This sparked a flashback for Eftel, and he recalled how the powerful sword, originally wielded by Generalissimo, the Demon King's second-in-command, had sliced through his level 10 magic. Nevertheless, in the present, the stubborn genie finally allowed Eftel and Anastasia to pass, but only to observe the antiques, not touch them. When Eftel tried to protest, the furious genie shouted for him to shut his filthy mouth, threatening to beat him some home training into him if he acted arrogantly. Infuriated, Eftel shouted back, demanding the genie show him the sword's exact location, which the genie did, though smugly warning that an enshrinement magic had been placed on all the antiques in the treasury and only Merlin, or even the real Eftel himself, could break the spell. Before the genie could finish, Eftel touched the sword, instantly dispelling the enshrinement magic, leaving the genie in immense shock. Just then, an angry Merlin entered the treasury and scolded the genie for acting like some nosy Karen. While staring at Eftel wielding the sword, the genie, after seeing that Eftel had dispelled the magic without even chanting, finally realized that Eftel must be nobody but the reincarnation of the mighty Stormgale. Immediately, the genie threw himself to the ground and apologized for his numerous insolence. In response, Eftel said it was cool, but then asked that he remembered both him and Anastasia face since they would be staying in the mansion from then on. Later that evening, Merlin approached Eftel in his room, requesting a moment to discuss an important matter, to which Eftel urged her to skip the formalities and speak. She revealed that while bathing Anastasia, she noticed that Anastasia lacked thick curves fit for plot development. When Eftel tried telling Merlin that the kind of relationship he and Anastasia had wasn't of the OnlyFans type, Merlin, missing the point, insisted Anastasia, as a companion of the legendary sage, must have the body of Kim and all. Frustrated, Eftel snapped at her to quit with her wild imaginations. Shifting topics, Merlin raised concern about the slave crest slapped on Anastasia's backside, warning that parading a slave with such a mark was similar to carrying a ticking bomb. Losing his temper, Eftel yelled at Merlin to stop annoying him, and made it clear that it was his decision to go around with whoever he chose to. After the enrollment paperwork for Althena Academy of Sorcery was finalized, Eftel and Anastasia became full students, but on their first day, demon students glared at Eftel in disdain, questioning what a human was doing there. Originally a sorcery school for humans, the academy had transformed into one for demons following the Great War and the Demon King's subjugation. Upon entering the classroom, the stares grew sharper, with one girl, unable to hide how cringe she was, asked why the new transfer student was human, while another arrogant demon sneered that Eftel reeked of vulgar human stench. The demon girl Maria angrily approached Eftel, demanding to know how he'd gained entry into the school. Before Eftel could respond, the arrogant-faced demon named Abe interjected, asserting that Eftel must have secured admission thanks to influential parents. Nevertheless, Abe sneered that Eftel was premium trash and incapable of keeping pace with the teachings of the elite academy. Calmly, Eftel replied that he'd do his best. However, this only fueled Abe's anger, as he snapped that the academy was reserved for the elite of the elite and for superior species like demons and elves. Abe also made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate studying or sharing a table with an inferior human. Maria immediately chimed in, stating that even though she wouldn't discriminate based on race, she would discriminate based on merit, and since it was very clear Eftel lacked sorcery talent, she would suggest he stayed as far as possible from her sight. Just then, Merlin entered the classroom, announcing the start of homeroom and ordering everyone to settle down. Next, Merlin revealed that before introducing the new transfer student, she had news. There would be a change in homeroom teachers. Slamming her hand on a black card on the desk, Merlin proclaimed that, starting that day, she, the headmaster, would personally take over as their teacher. Instantly, the class buzzed with excitement at the prospect of being tutored by the legendary Merlin. Wasting no time, Abe rose, boasting that Merlin must have chosen to teach them because she'd heard of a superior student, himself, and wanted to mentor him directly. Stunned, Merlin asked who the heck he was, to which Abe smugly introduced himself as the big fish of the class, the student with the highest mark in the class. However, Merlin retorted that his ugly face was not the reason why she had decided to be their teacher. Pointing at Eftel, Merlin clarified that it was because of this standout student she'd made the choice. While Eftel was dying of embarrassment at the sudden spotlight, Abe angrily asked Merlin if she had taken the role because of a lowly human, to which she firmly answered yes. This infuriated Abe to no end as he stared at Eftel with so much hate and disgust. Abe angrily questioned what made Eftel so special to deserve preferential treatment, adding that he couldn't fathom why an incompetent human belonged there. In response, Merlin asked Abe to stop with his racist behavior or else he would end up a third-rate sorcerer. Merlin firmly instructed the class that instead of being racist, it would be in their best interest if they observe and learn all they could from Eftel. Though the students appeared shocked, Merlin encouraged them to seize this chance to ditch the nasty stereotype they had against the human race. During lunch break, Abe approached Eftel's desk, his face twisted with rage, and demanded to know who Eftel really was. Playfully, Eftel quipped that he was their friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, infuriating one of Abe's lackeys, who roared for an explanation of what made Eftel so special to captivate Merlin. Before Eftel could reply, Abe cut in, claiming he'd figured it out. Pointing accusingly, Abe suggested it was because they were the kids Merlin, the old hag, was grooming in sorcery. Slamming the desk, Abe pressed further, asking if Eftel was her plaything. When Eftel sharply demanded to know who the heck Abe was referring to an old hag, Abe shot him a lethal stare and challenged him to speak up, leaving Eftel stammering that he had nothing to say. Later, for the day's final lesson, Merlin announced a tournament and then asked who would represent the class. She explained it was a friendly monthly event, with 5 representatives chosen from each class. Specifically, Merlin noted they urgently needed someone for the mage position. At that moment, Eftel began sweating, hoping to avoid being picked, knowing competition unleashed a fiercer side of him. When Merlin asked for volunteers, a brief silence fell until she added that self-nominations were welcome. Of course, Abe, the arrogant jerk, stood up like the main character, proclaiming he would represent the class. While everyone expected Abe to take the role, Eftel quietly rejoiced at dodging the spotlight. Suddenly, Merlin remarked that Abe wasn't her choice and, with Eftel in mind, asked if anyone else would step up. As the entire class looked stunned from their star boy's rejection, Anastasia timidly raised her hand and nominated Eftel. Since 2 students now vied for the mage spot, Merlin led Eftel and Abe to the arena, declaring a practice duel to determine the stronger candidate. As the match began, Abe taunted Eftel as an inferior species, vowing to expose his weakness. Without hesitation, Abe charged with his wooden blade, but Eftel sidestepped effortlessly, dodging the strike. Furious, Abe ordered Eftel to draw his blade and fight properly. Realizing Abe wanted a fair-looking fight, Eftel complied, planning to lose intentionally and take a beating. This time, Eftel lunged at Abe, swinging his sword, which Abe dodged before countering with his own strike. Feigning weakness, Eftel crumpled to the ground like some useless weakling. As the students cheered Abe, Eftel, in an attempt to make the fight look real, delivered a weak kick to Abe's face, expecting an easy dodge, only to smash his face, nearly knocking out his brain. Staggering backward, Abe struggled to stay upright but collapsed under the kick's force. Consequently, Eftel was named the victor, while the students were shocked at their star boy's downfall. To salvage demon pride, Maria insisted that though humans were hopeless at sorcery, their close combat prowess explained Abe's defeat. Maria added that Merlin had brought Eftel to the academy to enhance the Mage Knight curriculum. Later that night, while Eftel savored beef steak for dinner, Anastasia approached, requesting a private chat, which he welcomed. Anastasia asked how Eftel would handle a problem he couldn't handle with strength, to which Eftel replied, after pondering, that he'd make the best of it. Anastasia said she'd anticipated that answer, and then thanked Eftel for being a kind master, and also for enrolling her in the academy despite being a slave. But Eftel countered that she wasn't a slave to him. Yet, Anastasia interjected, saying she felt totally useless because she had no way to repay his kindness and generosity. Just then, she surprisingly stripped to her plot armor and said she was ready to let Eftel hit her mushy honeypot as repayment. But Eftel immediately had a spit take, covered his uncultured eyes, and insisted it wasn't necessary. Eftel explained that being her master wasn't the point, sharing meals with her was enough. Playfully, Eftel urged her to stop acting like a Playboy model, and then invited her to join him for steak, surprising Anastasia. Thus, that night, Eftel and Anastasia dined together. But the next morning, Eftel found the genie weeping in the treasury. When questioned, the genie revealed someone had stolen all the treasures. Eftel figured the genie had turned a blind eye because it was Anastasia who entered the treasury and then escaped the mansion. When Merlin mentioned that the crest on Anastasia's buns was a thievery variant and must be the reason Anastasia turned into a thief, Eftel clarified that it was the mark beneath the slave brand that had activated and then swore to break the irregular slave mark contract. But as Merlin reminded Eftel that the contract for an irregular slave mark can't be simply cancelled like some business deal, Eftel assured her that he was aware of that. It turned out irregular slave contracts, binding two parties, were enforced by a beast named Kami. Alarmed, Merlin asked if Eftel intended to challenge Kami, recalling how the beast once destroyed a nation over a broken contract. Confidently, Eftel affirmed that, though difficult, he would proceed. At that point, Merlin demanded to know why Eftel would choose to go to such a length for Anastasia even after she betrayed him. Eftel responded saying just like he adopted her was the same way he adopted Anastasia, and he would protect and watch over Anastasia to the very end. Hearing this, Merlin pointed out that she was expecting such a reply from him because she had always knew he was that kind of man. Curiously, Merlin asked if he had any idea where Anastasia must have fled to which Eftel revealed that he had placed a magical GPS on the treasures a while ago, and it is expected that Anastasia should be delivering the treasures to her master soon. Meanwhile, in Abe's residence, Anastasia unexpectedly delivered the treasures to him and even gave him Eftel's prized sword, prompting him to smirk maliciously in excitement. What do you think the relationship is between Abe and Anastasia, and would Eftel get her back? Comment, overpowered mage, if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.